Hey, welcome back to the podcast, Game Changers. Exciting episode lined up today. I have Reverend Dr. Amber Mattingly. So she has a tremendous background. Her journey is amazing and can't wait to get into it with Reverend Dr. Amber Mattingly. So quick background on Reverend Dr. Mattingly. She's passionate about teaching practices that invite people to see and hear themselves and each other. So right off the bat, I got to ask you, first of all, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm really excited to be here this morning.
Yeah. So tell me about the teaching practices that invite people to see and hear themselves and each other. What does that mean? And I know I just started your bio, but I find that very intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I received a doctorate in compassionate leadership studies. And in that doctoral program, we really focused on compassion-based practices that invite us to first take a pause when we're having certain emotions or certain resistance to things, and so that we can hear that part of ourselves that has something to say to us, and not resist further or stuff those emotions down. And
Wow,
as
that's
we learn
interesting.
to listen to ourselves, yeah, and as we learn to listen to ourselves, we actually learn how to be better listeners for each other. And so that when something happens and
Mhm.
someone displays a strong emotion, instead of meeting that emotion and rising to it in sort of a violent or power struggle way, we instead are able to ask good questions, and be a better listener for each other.
Boy, I love that. Yeah. Ask good questions and don't get violent.
Right.
Good advice. So this passion comes from your Christian faith tradition, and a sense of grounding in the Genesis story of Hagar, who names God the God who sees. Did I say that correctly, Hagar?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. Now I have read the book of Genesis, so I just want to make sure. I've always said Hagar, but nobody's ever told me if that's the correct pronunciation or not. The powerful story reminds Reverend Dr. Mattingly that no one is outside the boundary of God's love. Amber is a graduate of Baylor University in 1999 and received a Master of Divinity degree from George W. Truett Theological Seminary in 2002. Where is the George Truett Theological Seminary? Is that Baylor as well?
That's Baylor
Okay.
Seminary.
All
Yes.
right. Recently, you completed your Doctor of Ministry degree at Claremont School of Theology, and that is where? Claremont?
That is in Claremont, California. So just
Okay.
right outside of LA.
And did you live in California then? For
No, nope. We just
virtual?
traveled back and forth.
Gotcha. And then your project, From the Pew to the Mat, Seeing and Hearing the Outsider, focused on creating sacred space for people from any or no religious tradition to share their stories of blessing and brokenness. I love that. I love that.
Thank
Because
you.
that's what it's all about, right? I mean, there's a lot of people out there that have strong faith and no faith, and it's up to us as believers to help them on their journey, right?
Absolutely.
Strengthen
And
and give
provide
faith.
that safe space.
From this research, you created Sacred Flow. Sacred Flow imagines a world where all people live a trauma-informed, robust, strong, and healthy and resilient, flexible, and persistent life. Can you expand on that? There's a lot there.
Yeah, so when I graduated with my doctorate, I decided to continue the work. At that point, we were living in Kingwood, Texas, and I was not employed by any church. And so I decided to continue to further that work by going to different yoga communities. So I am also a certified yoga teacher, a trauma-informed yoga teacher, to just provide safe space there to engage in spiritual dialogue. And so bringing all that I've learned through my doctoral project to these various communities, as well as creating different communities myself, so that people could really experience what it feels like to be in a safe space, and what it means to listen to themselves and listen to
Mhm.
each other in a more holistic way.
Okay, very good. And now you are the solo pastor at Woodlands Christian Church here in the Woodlands, Texas. And you have two beautifully unique children, son Peyton, daughter Taylor, and your husband Chad is your best friend, which is exactly the way it should be. And he is Reverend Dr. Chad Mattingly. So you both are Reverend doctors, and man, got a lot of education in your house. I
We
bet you have
do,
some good
yes.
debates.
We do have a really great conversation here.
Very good. So tell us, and first of all, I should ask, do you like to be referred to as Reverend Doctor, Pastor, just Amber? Tell,
You
I
can just
mean,
refer to me simply as Amber. That'll be
Amber.
great.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure that we provide you all the respect that you've earned and
Thank
deserve.
you. I appreciate that.
So, Amber, tell us about your background and or more of how you got involved in ministry. What your background that lent yourself to getting into ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I grew up in experiencing many different Christian denominations. We went from church to church kind of as a family. And also, then I was involved in private schools. And so these private schools were connected to different denominations within Christianity. And at first, I thought that was a negative that we hadn't really committed to one over the other. But as I have grown older, I have such a deep love for the church, and respect for different denominations within our Christian tradition, even though they can be wildly different and,
Boy, can they
provide
ever?
worship space and theology that's very different. But I felt my call to ministry in my senior year at Baylor University, and really felt the presence of God in that moment, and that I was to begin the journey of this calling into ministry by gaining more knowledge of the scripture. And so that is what led me to seek out a
Hmm,
seminary. And I
okay.
traveled all around visiting different seminaries, and then came back to Waco, where I had already been living for 4 years, and realized I had such a gem just right there within my own community. And that's actually where I met my husband. He was a recruiter for the seminary. And so he
Oh,
tells
okay.
this. Yeah, he tells the story a little differently, that he, put a ring on my finger to recruit me to come to the seminary there.
Well, I mean, you went there, right? So
I
how
did.
so very good. You said as growing up, you went to several different denominations. And was that confusing? Was it just opened your thought process to different ways of believing? I mean, because I'm thinking, Catholic versus Presbyterian. Man, there's a little bit of a difference there, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Not saying that one is right or wrong. I don't want to get into that, but
Right.
there's a huge difference.
There is a huge difference, and there is a huge difference in my experience. And to be very honest, growing up, my maturity level exposed the behavior that I actually exhibited. And so I resisted a lot of the theological conversation, and even to the point of, whoever was teaching, saying you're wrong, and using that very kind of violent, dominating, behavior. And so for that, I have deep sorrow. But I will say that no matter where I was, whichever denomination I found myself in, I really found the teachers to be really accepting of me and never shaming me, never
Hmm.
quieting me, just allowing me to be on my own journey with that. And so then, as an adult reflecting back, I can really appreciate that they held safe space for me, even in my immaturity,
Hmm.
that allowed me later on to look back and reflect on that and say, that's the kind of minister I would like to be.
Boy, I love that. I mean, there are some, I mean, you go into one denomination and they're going to say that this is the best one, right? This is,
Yes,
you have to go to this church. And if you don't go to this church, you're not being the Christian that you're supposed to be. And nothing rubs me worse than to hear that, because I'm pretty sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Jesus did not say, you got to go to this church only, right?
that's
He
correct.
said, go
And
to the church, well, his church was one church,
yes.
right?
Yeah, and there's studies that actually say that Jesus actually never meant to form a separate religion from Judaism. And so we can, debate that back and forth, but if he never meant to do that, then what is the one right church? And so that becomes a very open space for dialogue and conversation around, hey, we believe different things, we worship in different ways, and yet we're all a part of the body of Christ.
Boy, yeah, good segue to the next question I want to ask, and this is about your book. It
Okay.
is um, a leap of interfaith. So here it is. You can find it on Amazon. Awesome book. But one of the things that you mentioned in here, well, first of all, tell us a little bit about your book, and then I'll ask my question on purification and increased meditation, because that was intriguing to me and not where I was expecting this book to go. So, but tell us a little bit about how this book came about.
Yeah, what a great question. It's something I love to talk about. When I started in the doctoral project or program there at Claremont, I walked in to this big auditorium not knowing a single human being. And this has happened to me probably only a handful of times in my life. But I saw just this woman with a huge smile on her face, and I was very drawn to her. And she was, fully robed. She was a Tibetan Buddhist monk. But there was something about her that I felt our hearts connected. And so I immediately walked across the room, introduced myself, and enjoyed being in her presence in every class that we were together, whether it was online or in person. Well, our final year at Claremont, we were allowed to take different classes outside of the prescribed curriculum. And so she chose to take Christian spiritualities, and I chose to take interfaith spiritualities. So looking across traditions at various spiritual practices, participating in those, and then reflecting on those. And it just was really funny because in my class, I had to find somebody of a different faith tradition that felt comfortable teaching me a particular practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so immediately I thought, well, Pima, I want her, if she feels comfortable and gets permission, I would like for her to teach me a practice. And my words were, I wanted it to be a practice that was very heartfelt to her. So I didn't want to skim the surface. I really wanted to experience something that she felt was heartfelt for her. And then
You don't seem like
her,
the kind of person that's going to skim on anything. I
no,
mean, you're doing
I
a
dive
deep
in
dive
deep.
into whatever the subject is.
That's right. And her final project in her class was to write about a Christian mystic. She got permission to write about what she felt like was a current Christian mystic. And I didn't know about this in the beginning, but she chose me.
Okay.
And So she had to interview me, and I was working with her on this purification and increase practice. And so when we finished these, we had to write, of course, up about our results and our experience in this much longer paper. And then once we graduated, we continued having conversation and dialoguing. And at one point, I just said, Pima, I think we have a project that we can do together. It began in the spring when you were teaching me this practice. And I think it would be really fascinating for us to gather a group of Buddhists and a group of Christians and translate the meditation for Christian use and invite both groups to practice this meditation and look at spiritual growth through this practice. And kind of our big question was, a lot of groups that are interfaith serve together. And that's really beautiful that we can come together, set aside our differences, honor our differences, and serve together. But our big question was, can we grow spiritually together?
Wow,
What
that's a
would
great
that be like?
question.
Yeah,
Some I would think would really disagree with you on that.
of course. Yeah.
So, but what was your takeaway?
Our takeaway was that yes, the Buddhist group had never done this meditation before, and so we saw a rise. What we measured was on a compassion-based scale. So we can say that for us, God is love, God is compassion, and for in the Buddhist tradition, they look at growth and compassion. So that's where we could meet each other in this spiritual growth assessment. And so we found a compassion-based assessment tool measured before the practice, and then we took that same tool and measured after the practice. And what we saw was a level of rise of self-compassion as well as compassion for others. And so we really looked at that as a key indicator for spiritual growth. Now, I related that to looking in the New Testament to where Paul writes a lot about that the fruits of the Spirit, like how will we know? Well, it's if we're bearing fruit, if we have love, if we have joy, if we have peace, if we have patience, if we have kindness, if we have all these things, then we know we're following the way. Less about, do you have the right belief? Are you saying the right thing? But more about, are you growing in these things that we say God is? And if we
Right.
truly are created to be image bearers of the divine, then we should be growing these fruits in our lives.
Well, a lot of the rules are man-made, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what drives me crazy. Like we're told to do all these things and or not do some, and you've got to do this, and if you don't, you're not gonna get to heaven. But isn't the Bible the overall instruction book of everything?
Absolutely.
I mean,
It is, and yet we have misinterpreted it and we have used it in a way that is not good towards other people. And so
amen.
yes. And so, it really, we have to honor it in our sacred tradition, what it is. But I think that God is also bigger than that.
Hmm.
And so our experience, I love Richard Rohr. He writes a lot, and he's a great speaker, and he's somebody who I really admire. And he says we need to really look at this three-legged stool. One is our sacred text, the scripture. What does it have to say? Then
Hmm.
we look at history and what have our forefathers had to say. And then we look at our own experience in life. And for his tradition, he feels like they need to do a better job of looking at experience and honoring other people's experience of the divine, listening to each other, learning from each other. We all see things just a little differently, enough that if we don't resist it, God actually gets bigger and not
Right.
smaller.
Yeah. So I love that. Text, history, and experience, and that's Richard Rohr.
Richard Rohr, yes.
Okay. Well, how do we learn more about Richard Rohr and his writings?
So he has the Center for Action and Contemplation. And if you just Google that, you
Okay.
can join his newsletter, and so you would get different readings each week. He does teachings. You can participate in a class that's already prepackaged, but it will also direct you to a lot of his writings.
All right. Cool. Very good.
Yeah,
So in your book and you know your friendship with Pima and I'm not going to even try to pronounce Pima's first name,
that's
but
okay.
can you tell us what?
We can just call her Pima or Lisa, either way.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
But it's Ngawang, and I don't know how to pronounce it, but we'll call her
that's it.
Lisa or Pima. Excellent.
Yeah, Lisa or Pima.
So did
Yes.
you get any pushback from anybody since you were studying Buddhism, or at least spending time with a Buddhist and learning more about their practice? Did you get any pushback on that?
No, the seminary that I went and did my doctoral studies in is an interfaith seminary. And so it was very encouraged. I think we probably in our project took it farther than most people. But the professors who we were working with and who were mentoring us really enjoyed our project and enjoyed how the friendship unfolded, and that we mutually saw that yes, each of us wants to grow within our own faith tradition, feeling very confident and secure and
Yeah,
grounded in our different faith traditions, and yet exploring the possibility of spiritual growth together, but within those honoring the differences of our faith tradition. And
yeah,
so they really enjoyed the project, and we're still in conversation with them about next steps forward.
I love that. And I think we learn so much if we are open-minded to those of different backgrounds, different faiths, and I mean, we can learn so much from somebody else and what they've experienced in their history. And you know, I think I applaud you for what you've done with Pima, and I think that we can just learn so much more and grow as a society if we were to be a little bit more open-minded.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Open-minded, open-hearted. I guess the only pushback I did receive was just making sure that I wasn't appropriating a tradition, and kind of stealing a tradition's jewels. But we didn't have
oh, yeah,
any conversation really around that, because I went to her and I asked her to teach me a heartfelt
yeah,
practice, and
and that
then
wasn't the
she got.
point, right?
Correct. And then she invited me to change the practice, to change the meditation into words that would feel appropriate for Christians. And so there was a lot of asking permission, honoring differences, dialogue around, okay, yes, that word may work in Christianity, but it doesn't really capture the essence of what we mean in this
Mhm.
tradition. And so, having a friendship there, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's transition a bit our conversation. One of the things that concerns me most as a believer and somebody who tries to have strong faith and growing in my faith is the really outward decrease, if you will, of those in our society on faith and those that are attending church. And it just seems to me like for us believers and those who try to have a strong faith, we're constantly set aside or demeaned in some way. Do you see this as well, or am I just like way out there?
Well, to be honest, I approach it in a way that most likely I need to apologize for whatever it is. If they have some negative feelings, as if I introduce myself as a pastor, or if the idea of church comes up, and if there is a negative reaction or a resistance, or even I wouldn't want to be friends with you type expression, I really take the opportunity to ask questions and listen to their life experience. And most of the time, I find that their life experience tells me that the church has harmed them in some way, has
Mm,
not provided the safe space that we hope to be for each other. And
mhm.
that if I can be a representative from the church that asks for their forgiveness in that, then I find that there's a much more openness to continued conversation.
I love that. So instead of saying, "Well, yeah, you need to have a strong faith," your response is, "Well, let's have a little discussion and help me understand why it is you feel the way you do, because chances are there's a reason." Right? I mean,
Absolutely.
everybody's got history. Most of us have some type of baggage that we bring to the table, and addressing that may, clear up some issues and may bring us around to where we need to be. And so I applaud you for taking that effort. For those of us who may be more impatient or don't have that thought process, what can we do to maybe gain some more patience and to help those who may be struggling with their faith?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I would never say that I was a patient person when I was younger. I was a jump into action. I was have a response, be quick to say something back. And
Mhm,
I never found that successful. And most often it ended in argument or big disagreement. And so
mm,
I had to step back from that and say, this is not working, and it's not beneficial for my own flourishing, and it's
mhm,
obviously not beneficial to the other person in their flourishing.
mhm,
And so how might I meet them where they are? And honestly, I think the growing in patience takes that the practice for us is to really slow down and to be more mindful just of ourselves, because I think a lot of times we go around and we don't pause for reflection when things happen within us, when we experience hurt, when we
mhm,
experience things that are negative, and we don't take that pause to reflect. We either dismiss it or brush it off and just move on. Or, we can even do what I call spiritual bypassing, which is, well, whatever happens, we just have to rejoice always, or just find the joy. And instead, I
mm,
think the invitation is that the way to joy, the way to rejoicing in the Lord always, is to sit with the uncomfortable feelings first, and to honor that we are human beings living a human experience, and that we're going to experience uncomfortable things like anger and sadness and hurt and disappointment and frustration. And it's time to sit for a minute, journal if we need to, meditate on it, whatever it is. But we've got to take time to pause and reflect and understand the story behind our own uh, reaction to things, our own emotions to things.
yeah,
That I feel like helps us when we encounter others in the world.
boy, wise counsel there. Reflect, pause, and reflect. And I think, well, that reminded me of what I mean. I say this all the time: emotion high, logic low. When you get emotional about something, your ability to process information in a logical manner diminishes. So there's an
Yes.
inverse correlation between emotion and logic, and of course that's been proven. So when we hear something that really strikes us, maybe in a wrong or negative way, immediately our emotions kick in. And then our
Yes.
ability to process something, whatever the content is, that conversation logically won't happen. And so then we fire back with emotions. And so the
Absolutely.
pause is so important so we can kind of gather our emotions and, think logically about the situation. And then we can have a little bit more of a productive conversation. But if we don't take that pause and reflect, it's probably not going to happen, right?
Yeah, and when we start that practice, we can take a few deep breaths, which engages the parasympathetic nervous system. Because when we have these strong emotions, our sympathetic nervous system is engaged and we are ready for action. We want to fight whatever it is, or we want to flee. And then we take a deep breath, which then shifts to our parasympathetic, which is the calm, the community oriented, the more peaceful setting. But that doesn't happen, just super fast for those of us who haven't practiced that for a long time.
Right.
So for some of us, we have to take a breath, but then we also need to say, I'm not really ready for this conversation right now. I need some time to go reflect. And how about we meet up again, in a few days when I
Mhm.
don't feel so emotional. And so
Right.
that would be the process. And then as we practice that, really in the moment, we can re-engage the creative brain through even just the breath.
Yeah. And I think it's like waiting 24 hours to send the email, right? I mean,
Right.
take a break. It's not
Yes.
typically it's not going to be the best situation if you just fire off an email when you're emotional or when you respond, verbally when you're emotional. So we just the reflection, the pause and reflect. I think that's super, super important. Wise counsel. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you,
you're
Reverend
welcome.
Doctor.
And some people you get kind of weird about breath practice, just breathing. But when Christians have a negative response, even to breath work, I always try to invite them to consider that the name Yahweh is actually the sound of our breath. And so from our Hebrew
Mm.
Bible, we learn that our forefathers in the faith knew that the breath was the breath of life. And so
Mhm.
in breathing, we are speaking the name of God.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So when you see our society overall in general, would you say that we are less spiritual as a society than we maybe were years ago, 20, 30, 50 years ago? Or is
I
our
would say,
spiritualness in a different direction?
yeah, I think it's just different. Maybe I would say, and if we had to categorize things, I would say that we are less religious than we were, and we are more spiritual.
Okay.
I think that so many people have been hurt by the church, and the church has not owned their part in that, and just wants people to come to church and be believers,
Yeah.
and yet without dealing with all the hurt that we've caused in the world, and all the ways in which we have not followed God and misinterpreted things and missed the mark. I mean, we are humans and we're going to mess it up,
Yeah.
but we have to own that first. And many church traditions
Amen.
are not.
Own it.
Own
Yes.
it.
So,
Yes.
and full disclosure, so I'm Catholic,
Yeah.
and so owning it is a big deal for me. And
Yes.
when the church has wronged you, own up to it.
Yes.
You got something bad going on, address it, take care of
Yes.
it. And when that doesn't happen, what happens to uh, the masses? I mean, uh, credibility is lost. That's when you get people with baggage, right? And they're like,
Yes.
well, look, why am I going to go to church? Look at what they've done. I'm not doing
Right.
that. Own up
Right.
to it. Own up to it, you know?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I
And
don't
we
mean
have
to
a,
speak negatively about the Catholic Church. That's not my point. I mean, it
oh,
happens in all over the place. But when
yes.
there is wrong that's being done, we have to own it and take action. Otherwise,
Yes.
it's going to hurt all of us in some way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we see, less people entering the ministry. Well, and we want to look at that and go, okay, well, why is God not calling, or people aren't responding to the call? Well, I actually want to shift that a little bit to invite us to consider that the church has been really terrible to its ministers as well. Um, Many ministers are not paid even a living wage, don't have health insurance, are not supported. Boards turn on them very quickly when they aren't, giving them X, Y, and Z, instead of seeing them also as a human being,
Yeah.
growing spiritually, and that they're growing together and honoring that.
Well, another thing, and I'm sure you've seen this many, many times, when politics somehow gets into the church, and I don't mean politics as in US politics. I mean political, turf battles on the church board, or, it just ugliness starts to occur. And then it's like, what, you guys have lost sight on why we're even here. Like,
Right.
what are you doing?
Right.
So, but again, that goes back to, let's own up to what we've done maybe wrong, learn from
Yes.
it, move forward, and do so with compassion, peace, and love.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I was a part of the National Benevolent Association when I was working with Sacred Flow more consistently. And really, their invitation to the Christian community was to see where God was popping up in the world, see where the church was popping up in the world in different shapes and forms than we have ever considered before. And I think that is a good practice for us as Christians, because we can
Mhm.
become so afraid of this world, or afraid that things are going in the wrong direction. And
For
yet
sure.
Jesus offers us the worldview. Jesus's worldview was, no, we're going in a good direction. Like, things are headed towards love and compassion and peace. Things are headed in a good direction. And so we have to remind ourselves that God created this beautiful and safe world that we are to protect and care for, and protect and care for each other, and that things are going in a good direction. But we have to have, Jesus says, we have to have eyes to see it and ears to hear it.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Profound for sure. So two
Yes.
more kind of tough questions, if you don't
Okay.
mind. Then we're going to transition to some more lighthearted questions.
Okay.
So I've heard this before. I'm sure you've heard it many times. If somebody says, you know what, I just don't believe in God. I don't believe in that there's a higher power. I don't believe any of that stuff. I'm in control of everything that I do. I'm in control of my destiny. You know, don't you, there's nothing you can say that's going to change my mind. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, great question. One, if there is complete resistance there, then it's not the time to really say anything.
Mhm.
Because if there's complete resistance, then they're not going to hear anything you say as loving or kind. They're going to interpret, even if you have the best words and the most compassionate things to say, they're not going to hear them. And that's just where they're at in their
Mhm.
experience. And so, honoring their experience. I hear you. I hear where you're at. And then asking better questions. Well, tell me more about that. And, how does that affect your day to day life? And, what do you do when you're in times where you're hurting? What do you do when you're in times where you don't see love in the world? How does that help you, hurt you, kind of negative, or really, not have an impact on your life at all? And so I have found that talking about community, especially as we are a pandemic informed a community
Hmm.
now. I think community really speaks to people, because those without a faith community went through what we went through alone. And
Hmm.
those who had a faith community experienced life together. Of course, we were still kind of spread apart, but we had ways in which we experienced life together. And so I think the loneliness in our society and the community emphasis is something that is starting to speak to people, because now they know what that felt like to be without.
Yeah, yeah. So again, it's pause and reflect. Don't rush to judgment. Don't get emotional, but it's learn where they're coming from. Everybody's
Absolutely.
got a history. Many of us have baggage. So try to learn a little bit about where they're coming from. And then the timing, if it's right, maybe you can expand and talk a little bit. But if the timing is not right, then come back to it maybe at some point in the future. So
Yeah, I mean, it's
good
like
counsel,
Jesus, gives us that parable of scattering the seed. We don't know in what ways we are scattering seed for good. We're not all going to reap the harvest, but we may be
right?
doing, different things for different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. So somebody now has come to me and said, I sort of believe, Jeff, I think I'm getting there, but I'd like to read the Bible and see what's in there. What books do you suggest that I look at first? So my first reaction is, and truth be told, I have read the Bible cover to cover. Doesn't mean I can recite anything, right? I have a lot to learn. Every time you go back, you learn something new. But the one thing that I would say, if somebody were to ask me that question, don't go read Judges and Kings or Revelations, because if you read those three, you probably are going to be freaked out a little bit. But if somebody, that's my opinion, because there's I mean, everything in those, you have to really take your time and understand what is in each of those books, in my opinion, again.
Mhm.
But if somebody were to come to you with that question, well, what would you suggest?
Great question. There are so many different types of writing within our sacred text. And I think we're all drawn to different writings, poetry, narrative, so just so many different wisdom literature, so many different
Mhm.
types within the sacred text. And so I would have to know a little bit more about them. But if it was just a blanket statement, I would say start with the Gospels. I interpret everything in light of Jesus. That is my hermeneutic. That is my way of interpreting scripture. But if somebody really wants to dig into the human experience of God, then I would point them to the Psalms, because the Psalms give us permission to cry out angry words to God and weep in
Mhm.
sorrow and rejoice. And so that is a book that I would say, if you're wanting the human experience, to go there. But some people don't connect to that, and
Right.
that's okay too.
Okay. Great suggestions. So you are so busy with church and everything you're involved in outside of church, and of course your family. How do you find balance? How do you get to that point in where you feel like everything's in order in your life?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to find in our world. But I also have to step back and say, I'm a leader within our tradition. And so if I am not finding balance, then nobody else will follow that.
Hmm.
So I take it as a part of my own spiritual practice as well as leadership to show how we can have balance in our life, which means that, the end of the day is the end of the day for me. And I transition to the work that I do within the community that has nothing to do with the church. It has to do with my family or my
Hmm.
kids and the activities that they are involved in. And but my churches have been very honoring of that, which I appreciate, because they see me as a whole human being. Yes, I am their minister, and I have all the duties there that I need to perform within my job and my calling. And
Hmm.
yet, I also have a life outside of that and a family, and so just having really good boundaries with my time,
Hmm.
using my time wisely. I am what you call a front loader. So the front of the day is where I get everything done, check off all those things, do my reading and writing, whatever needs to be done, so
Okay.
that I can be more flexible with the second half of the day and what people are needing, or my family is needing, or even self care.
Okay. Are you an early riser? 4 a.m., 5 a.m.?
No, I actually
No.
listened to one of your podcasts that told me that I should be, and I was like, "Oh no!" And I used to be. I
Robin
used to be
Sharma, the
that.
5 a.m. club. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. Tough to
I
do.
used to. Yeah, I used to be that, and I admire that. Now we're more a 6 a.m. My husband and I have a practice that we have been doing since we got married. So since 2001, where we have coffee together every morning. And so we get up
Oh,
at 6 a.m.
awesome.
and we have coffee together.
Perfect. It's so important to keep that relationship going. We get busy in our everyday lives and you get up, go to work, and come home, you're tired. And it's so important, whether it's coffee in the morning or a date night, whatever it is, you have
Yes.
to stay connected to your spouse. And
Yes.
so that's great. Coffee every morning. And I would encourage people to take up that practice.
Yes.
Fun question for you. So,
Sure.
all of your experience, your education, everything you've done in life, you've learned so much. You have so much to offer, and have already given so much back. But if you had the opportunity to meet anybody, and let's say three different people in our history or present,
Mhm.
who would they be and why?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I always struggle with like limiting what three? And so I really thought about it. A part of my doctoral study was to read Henry Nouwen's writings. Now, Henry Nouwen was a professor, he was an author, he was a speaker on spiritual matters, and he was an activist. And he actually took himself out of the spotlight when his career was at a real high and felt called to join a community for adults who are differently abled. And he
Hmm.
became a caregiver for one individual named Adam. And so his works to me are so deeply profound, and it's so vulnerable and honest
Hmm.
that I would love to sit and have coffee with him sometime. That
Okay.
would be beautiful.
And
Um,
his name is Henry
Henry Nouwen.
Nouwen. Okay. All right. Very good.
Mhm.
I bet most of our listeners are not familiar with Henry Nouwen, so we'll have to look him up. Excellent.
Yes. Another one is Saint Hildegard of Bingen. Now, there's a lot of our saints and Christian mystics who I would love to meet and have read their writings, and just they had just deeply profound experiences of the divine and tried to, in human words, tell us about their experience. But Saint Hildegard, she and I connect on many levels because she also is very interested in health of the human body and how God gave us, everything we need on this earth for health and healing and wholeness. And so I feel like she and I would have some really interesting
Hmm.
conversations, and that I could learn so much more through a conversation with her. And then
Okay.
surprisingly, I would
Saint
say,
Hildegard. Okay, I gotta get
yeah,
these
Saint
right.
Hildegard of Bingen, and she
Okay.
has writings, and you can just Google her and find her works.
All right. These
Um,
are great, by the way. I mean, usually I don't get, Henry Nouwen or Saint Hildegard of Bingen. I get, I don't know, President Washington or, something like that. So these are awesome. All right, one more.
and I would say the Buddha.
Wow.
I would
Okay.
love to sit down and have a conversation to talk about, his path. Now, many people have written about this idea that Jesus really didn't live long enough to give us a path towards spiritual formation in the way that he saw it. Now, we can debate that or not. I feel that the Buddha was able to give us a path towards really embodying the fruits of the spirit that are talked about in our sacred
Mm-hmm.
text.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would feel just really honored to be in the Buddha's presence and to learn his experience of awakening that he had, which led him to then go back and want to bring others with him.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I would love to understand more about this idea of taking refuge or finding safety within. That was actually in our project something that several Christians brought up, that we assume within the church that God is safe, and we assume these things, yet we never talk about how it is that we find safety in the divine, which I think is really very fascinating. I had to reflect on my own Christian journey once that came up in the study and realized, it always was just assumed that the divine was this safe space for me. But how would I help someone to see that who doesn't have that background? So taking refuge is something that's very important in the Buddhist tradition, and something that I think, we can learn from.
Awesome. Wow. Henry Nouwen, Saint Hildegard of Bingen, and the Buddha.
Yes.
Those are awesome. Awesome. And I hope Pima knows that you would want to meet the Buddha.
Yes. She does.
Yeah, since she's Buddhist, right? I mean, she's
That's
Buddhist.
right.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you so much for being on Game Changers. This has been a great conversation. I've learned so much. Reverend Dr. Amber Mattingly, how do people learn more about your church, about you and your book? How do they get more information?
Yeah. So you can visit my church's website, www.twcc.org. I also have my own personal website, which is at ambermattinglylivefree.com. And you can find more about the book there.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure having you. Learned a lot. Hope you come back sometime in the future and we'll expand on all of these wonderful points that you brought up today. And hopefully we're learning more about and living more in compassion and taking that pause and reflecting and reaching out to others. So
Yeah.
wise
Thank you. It's been
counsel.
such an honor to be with you and so
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, good, good. Thanks so much. And listeners, thanks for tuning in to Game Changers. I know today has been a great day, and I know tomorrow will be even better. Peace, everyone.